My mother married me off to a rich heir who couldn't walk. On our wedding night, I asked him carefully, "Want me to carry you to bed?" He gave a lazy smile. "If you don't mind." I rolled up my sleeves, bent down to lift him, only to lose my balance. We crashed to the floor together. I was this close to inheriting $100 million. Fresh out of college, my mother sold me to a wealthy man, Damon, for over $10 million. Word was, he was the textbook definition of old money. Then came the accident that wrecked his legs and cost him his place in the family's line of succession. Now, he was rich, idle, and, according to my mother's worried whispers, I heard it's not just his legs. He can't have children, either. My eyes lit up. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. A husband with money, social standing, and no chance of fathering a baby? What could be better? So my mother and I split the $10 million and I happily floated, into marriage. Why marry a crippled man? For the money, obviously. Crass? Shameless? Sure. But also honest. I'll admit it, on my wedding day, I was a little nervous. He needed a wife with no connections, a decorative piece for his life. My mother and I wanted his money. We struck a deal so easily it was almost laughable. Which meant that the first time I actually saw him was on the day we got married. Right before the ceremony, my mother shoved me into his private lounge. Her excuse? Go bond with your husband. Bond? With 10 minutes left on the clock? Sure. I lifted the hem of my gown and stepped inside, rehearsing some safe greeting, only to freeze. Wait. Who the hell was this? Wasn't my groom supposed to be a poor, crippled heir who couldn't have kids? The man in the wheelchair was nothing like that pathetic image. Tailored black suit. Shirt collar open, 2 buttons undone, like he'd shown up to his own wedding just to prove he could bend the rules. Even sitting down, his back was straight as a blade. Aristocratic. Untouchable. And then there was his face. No poetic nonsense could do it justice. My grip slipped. The gown caught under my heel, and I stumbled forward, landing in a humiliating half-kneel right at his feet. I tilted my head up, scrambling for dignity. If I said I walked into the wrong room, would you believe me? He'd been watching me since the moment I stepped in. Now, from his poised seat in the wheelchair, his gaze swept over my disheveled form and finally rested on the wedding gown, the gown he'd had sent over weeks ago. Take a guess, he said. I figured, he might not be able to walk, but he sure as hell wasn't stupid. Trying to shake off the awkwardness, I sprang to my feet and decided honesty was my safest bet. My mom told me to spend a little time with you. You know. Bond. He gave a low, amused laugh. A glance at his watch. 5 minutes of bonding should be plenty to survive the ceremony. Remembering this man was my benefactor, Damon, I quickly shifted into business mode. At the wedding, is there anything I should know? Anything I should do? In my head, I was practically shouting. Give me demands. Give me conditions. Then give me more money. Instead, he loosened his tie with lazy precision and said, no. Just be quiet and look pretty. Oh. Sure. I took the hint, stepped to the side, and kept my mouth shut. But my eyes betrayed me. They kept drifting back to him, drinking in every line of that face. I'm shallow. I admit it. And for the first time I regretted celebrating the fact that he couldn't have children. A face like that, what a damn waste. The wedding went off without a hitch. Being a decorative wife? Easiest job in the world. All I had to do was keep my shoulders back, stomach in, chin up, smile into the lights, and hold that pose until the ceremony was over. Damon seemed pleased with my performance. Afterward, tipsy from champagne, he slipped a bank card into my hands. No explanation, no amount mentioned. But from his expression, I assumed it was a reward. The heir to the Shaw fortune probably didn't do small change, so I tucked it away like it was treasure. Only later did I remember to ask for the PIN. Along with the card, he tossed me a set of keys and a slip of paper with an address and phone number. Then he climbed into his chauffeured car and left me to find my own ride home. Home, my ass. I had no intention of going to Mr. Shaw's mansion. First stop, the nearest bank. At the ATM, my hands actually trembled as I checked the balance. And then? Balance, $100. Just 2 zeros. I stared at the screen, frozen, until a man in line behind me huffed, "Lady, it's $100, not the lottery. Want me to pray over it for you before you withdraw?" Face burning, I pulled the card out and headed for the counter, clinging to one last hope. Nope. Still $100. Unbelievable. Sure, it wasn't a love match, but I'd still worn a couture wedding gown to marry him. $100? Was he tipping a beggar? The longer I thought about it, the angrier I got. So I yanked the cash out of the account and blew it on 3 taxis. 1 for me, 2 running empty beside us, his money, his waste. Except I miscalculated. Turns out Shaw's mansion was really far. The 3 taxis cost over $600 altogether. Which meant I spent his $100, and another $500 out of my own pocket. What a cursed day. That night, our wedding night, I sat on the sofa, staring at Damon's too perfect face, getting angrier the longer I looked. I was in the middle of mentally cursing him when his gaze suddenly slid to mine. Sylvia? Yeah, that's me. God, what was it about seeing the man who held the purse strings that made me instantly shrink? His eyes lingered on my face, light as a feather, sharp as a blade. Then his lips curled, just barely. Time for bed. My cheeks warmed before I could stop them. Then my mother's earlier words came back to me like a bucket of ice water. So, do you need me to carry you to bed? I asked, glancing at his long legs resting in the wheelchair. I added quickly, I'm pretty strong. He undid 2 buttons of his shirt, the motion unhurried. If you don't mind. I moved behind him, crouching low. After a beat, he leaned forward, his hands settling lightly on my shoulders, his arms draping loosely across my chest. He smelled clean, like pine on a cold morning. All I'd meant was to show a little goodwill to the man funding my future. But with him actually resting against me, so close, my face went hot again. He'd shed his jacket, the white shirt clung just enough to hint at what was underneath. I'd traded my heavy wedding gown for a thin, silky dress. When I hoisted him onto my back, I could feel his warmth through the fabric. That thought alone made my pulse stumble. Which was probably why my foot caught on the trailing hem of my dress. I went down. Hard. And I took him with me. I didn't move. Couldn't. Surely I wasn't an idiot, I'd survived 20 years without tripping over my own clothes. But tonight? Tonight I'd managed to flatten my brand new husband, my very wealthy brand new husband. Silence stretched. Too long. Panic prickled my neck. Had I knocked him out? Just as I was about to look up, his voice cut through the quiet. Low. Rough. Come here. I scrambled upright and edged toward him, crouching down. Before I could string a sentence together, his hand clamped around my wrist. One sharp pull and I landed against his chest. The floor was cold beneath us. Damon lay flat, one hand gripping mine, his eyes scanning my face at point-blank range. Up close, he was still devastatingly beautiful. Sylvia. His jaw was tight, teeth gritted. Help me back into the wheelchair. I can get myself to bed. Oh, okay. Damon's gaze had the kind of weight that made it hard to breathe. I couldn't meet it, so I looked away and helped him up. Problem was, we'd fallen a bit far from the wheelchair. It was parked several steps away, and with the whole can't-stand situation, I ended up easing him back down to the floor. Just sit here for a sec. I'll go get it. He said nothing, but his eyes dimmed, just a fraction. I could guess what he was thinking, probably regretting that if he was going to buy himself a trophy wife, he should have gone for one with at least a shred of competence. Determined to redeem myself, I dashed over, grabbed the wheelchair, and rolled it back like I was saving someone's life. I reached for him again, but he didn't move. Oh, so now we were sulking? I glanced down, ready to coax him, only to catch the quiet sigh he let out, his voice low and hoarse. You're on my foot. Right. Sorry. In my quest for redemption, I overcorrected. I bent low, put every ounce of strength into it, and outright lifted him into the chair. Apparently, that didn't please the Shaw heir either. His lips pressed into a thin line, the tips of his ears flushing pink. When he spoke, it was through gritted teeth. Sylvia. I asked you to help me, not haul me like a sack of potatoes. What a nightmare to please. Got it, I muttered, pushing him toward the bed. I stopped, curious to see how exactly he planned to get onto it. Then his voice came, pitched just a touch lower. Turn around. Fine. I turned. Except, there was a little mirror on the table in front of me, and in its reflection, I saw it all. Damon bracing his hands on the mattress, pushing himself up. And then, a solid thud. The man had fallen. The air was thick with awkwardness. With my back to him, turning around felt wrong, but not turning felt worse. I was still hesitating when his voice came from behind, low, clipped, and carrying a faint edge of frustration. What are you standing there for? Oh. I spun around at once. Damon was still on the floor, his legs looking useless, his lips pressed into a hard line. The tips of his ears burned red, probably the sting to his pride after hitting the ground twice in one night. I slid his arm over my shoulder, bracing him as I pulled him up, trying to be gentle. Mr. Shaw, don't take it personally. If I couldn't use my legs, I probably wouldn't even be able to wipe my. His grip on my shoulder tightened. Shut up. Okay. And that was that. I got him onto the bed without further commentary, until he hit me with his next order. From now on, when you're with me in public, just smile. Don't speak. Fine, I said. Hey, he paid me. I did the job. If Damon Shaw didn't want me to speak, I could drink water through my nose for all I cared. On our wedding night, I fully intended to sleep on the floor. Damon didn't allow it. He told me to sleep beside him, under the same blanket. Truth be told, I was fine with that, but a girl had to put on a little show. I was blushing, fidgeting, murmuring, "That's not really proper," when he suddenly handed me a bank card. I stared at it. Another $100? 200,000, he said. Deal, husband. I snatched the card and tucked it away with a grin. The night passed peacefully, except for one thing, cold. The bastard rolled over in his sleep and stole the entire blanket. Halfway through the night, shivering, I had no choice but to edge closer until I was pressed against him, clinging to half the covers. I vaguely remember thinking he was absurdly warm, like curling up next to a furnace. By morning, Damon was already in his wheelchair. No idea how he got there. The chair sat beside the bed, and he was holding a book, head bent, reading intently. Sunlight poured through the window, gilding his sharp features in gold. God, he was unfair to look at. I was still staring when he glanced up. Downstairs. Breakfast. Sure, I said, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. Had he not slept well? Which was odd, because I'd seen him sleeping like a rock, with my blanket. He set the book aside and rolled out of the room. I got up to wash and dress, but my gaze landed on the book he'd been reading. And of Green Gables. So the highborn heirs of old money families were secretly children at heart? After breakfast, Damon headed out. Before leaving, he told me, no matter where I went during the day, to be home by 7, dressed and ready. He was taking me to a family dinner that night. I nodded dutifully. A Shaw family dinner was no casual affair. And yet, yesterday, when Damon and I got married, the city's most powerful and glamorous people had shown up to congratulate us, but not a single member of his family bothered to attend. From Damon's expression, you'd think he couldn't care less. With no job and nothing to do in that cavernous, echoing mansion, I got bored fast. So I hailed a cab. Damon's garage was full of dust-covered luxury cars, but he hadn't left me a driver, and I didn't even have a license. Card in hand, I told the cabbie to take me to the most expensive mall in the city. It was packed, though most people there, like me, were just browsing. Prices in the tens or hundreds of thousands meant almost nobody was walking out with shopping bags. After an hour, my hands were empty but my stomach was twisting in pain. Remembering I had tissues in my purse, I headed for the public restrooms. The women's line snaked halfway down the hall. It was a Saturday, after all. The men's room, on the other hand, was practically deserted. And my stomach really wasn't giving me a choice. I slipped inside, locked a stall, and took care of business. Just as I was pulling my pants up and flushing, there came two sharp knocks on the divider, followed by a low, slightly hoarse voice from the next stall. "Sorry, could you spare a couple sheets of paper?" It was deep, smooth, magnetic. The kind of voice you could drown in. Without thinking, I dug into my bag and shoved what I had under the divider. A few seconds later, it slid back toward me. This isn't really right, is it?" "What, you don't have paper?" I asked, confused. Then I looked down. Oh, hell. I'd just handed him one of the sanitary pads I kept for emergencies. Face burning, I shoved actual tissues under the partition. "Sorry, wrong thing." It took him a few beats to take them. Then his tone lifted, the faintest hint of amusement curling at the edges. "A woman?" That's when I remembered, I was in the men's room. I didn't answer. I just bolted. By 7 o'clock, I was in my evening gown, makeup flawless, sitting primly on the sofa. The moment Damon's silhouette appeared in the doorway, tall upper body, wheelchair beneath, I rose to meet him, lifting the hem of my dress like a debutante offering proof of purchase. How do I look? I'll admit, I sometimes get lost in my own head and say the wrong thing. But when it comes to style, I don't miss. From black tie galas to dive bar dance floors, I've never once worn the wrong thing. Damon's gaze lingered on me for a good 6-7 seconds before sliding away. "Passable," he said lightly. "Passable? Please." He'd just looked away because he couldn't handle the view. "But fine, never call out the man signing your checks." So I volunteered to replace his assistant for the evening and pushed his chair out the door. The drive to the Shaw estate was only about 20 minutes. Damon said nothing the whole way, his expression darkening the closer we got. Looked like the rumors were true, the bad blood between him and the family ran deep. And this was the Shaw family. The front door wasn't a house, it was a damn estate. Land stretching so far you couldn't see the end of it. I tore my gaze away and moved behind Damon's chair again. With him as my VIP pass, we cut through without a single stop. The butler guided us through the sprawling grounds to a particular building, opened the door, and let us in. The banquet hall was huge, but no more than a few dozen guests. The moment we crossed the threshold, nearly every head turned our way. I kept my smile poised, pushing Damon forward as if I'd been born to glide through these rooms. Front and center stood a man and woman, the man in a tailored suit, posture sharp, the woman in a red dress that clung to her like it was made to measure. This was the main event. Sure enough, when we stopped before them, Damon paused 2 beats, then said in a low voice, "Brother." I'd guessed right, Marcus Shaw, the heir to the family. Marcus inclined his head, his gaze sliding briefly over Damon before landing squarely on me. His eyes were nothing like Damon's cool detachment, they were all ownership and steel. The kind of look that made your pulse trip over itself. I forced the flutter down and echoed, "Mr. Shaw." Something flickered in those still, deep eyes. Surprise? His brow ticked up the faintest bit. Then his gaze dipped, landing on my wrist. I followed it down. A simple silver bracelet, one I wore all the time. It didn't clash with my outfit, so I hadn't bothered to take it off. I looked up again, but Marcus's eyes had already moved on. Probably my imagination. Thank God his focus didn't linger. After a few cool words with Damon, he excused himself and drifted away into the crowd. Damon wasn't much for socializing. He had me wheel him into a quiet corner of the banquet hall, where he sat in silence, gaze drifting lazily from one guest to the next without speaking a word. After a while, boredom got the better of me. I leaned down. I'm going to the restroom. He gave a small nod, still wordless. Out in the hallway, with no one around, I slipped a cigarette from the tiny purse I'd been carrying. Restroom was code, my nicotine habit was kicking in. I just lit up when footsteps sounded behind me. Cursing under my breath, I fumbled to snuff the cigarette out. No need to put it out, came a voice from behind, smooth and faintly familiar. Give me one. I froze, cigarette hidden behind my back, and turned. Marcus. He stopped 2 paces away, palm open, waiting. I hesitated. They're cheap. Strong, too. That's fine. His lips curved slightly, almost a smile. Perfect. Well, what could I do? I dug out another cigarette and handed it over. He took it along with my lighter, lit up, and exhaled a slow stream of smoke before turning his head toward me. Didn't recognize me? I blinked. Of course I did. You're Damon's brother. No, he took another drag. The sharp planes of his profile cut clean lines in the dim light. This afternoon. Thanks for the paper. That was you? My voice jumped a pitch higher, but before I could fully process it, movement caught my eye. From around the corner, Damon appeared, wheeling himself forward, eyes half-lidded, gaze sliding lazily between Marcus and me. What was him? He asked. I stayed quiet, unable to answer. Marcus, cigarette balanced between his fingers, looked perfectly calm, perfectly unmoved. Under Damon's gaze, he even lifted the cigarette and took another drag, like my husband's question hadn't been worth acknowledging. I was stuck. What was I supposed to say? Oh, I spent the afternoon at the most expensive mall in town, wandered into the men's room, and accidentally handed your brother a sanitary pad? Yeah. No. Before I could decide, Damon's voice cut in again. Let's go. He turned the wheelchair without waiting for a reply. I hurried after him, passing Marcus, who, out of nowhere, said, "Good cigarettes." Thanks. That was the end of it. I darted forward and took over pushing Damon's chair. I knew which brother was my benefactor, even if the other one was richer. For all that it was called a family dinner, the size of the Shaw clan made it feel more like a high society cocktail party. I stood behind Damon, hands resting on the chair handles, smiling at every person who passed. But no one stopped to greet him. Not one. So it was true, losing his place as heir had also left Damon with almost no standing in the family. The thought made me feel an unexpected flicker of sympathy. Not that Damon seemed to care. He looked almost comfortable in his solitude. Then he reached for a small, delicate cake from a nearby table. Left hand holding the cake, he motioned me closer with his right. Come here. I leaned in obediently, and his fingers caught my cheek. In the next instant, the cake was pressed past my lips. Sweetness bloomed on my tongue. Damon brushed his hands together, flicking away a few crumbs, gaze lazy as ever. How's it taste? Good. He nodded. Pack some to go later. I blinked, tightening my grip on the chair handles as the realization hit. Yep, Shaw Jr. standing in the family really was rock bottom. In the novels I used to read, the aloof, powerful hero would have waved a hand and said, "I'll have the chef make you more." My benefactor? His grand gesture was, "Pack it up and take it home." The dinner stayed polite, at least on our side of the room. Over by Marcus, though, it was another story. He stood like a lighthouse in a storm, the crowd orbiting around him. I caught myself looking more than once. Not that it seemed to matter, Marcus barely spoke to anyone, his expression cool and unreadable. Aside from the woman on his arm, he didn't offer a single person more than a nod. Even in a so-called family dinner, the hierarchy was crystal clear. Bored, I turned to make small talk with Damon, only to catch him looking toward the crowd as well. At first, I thought he was watching Marcus. But no, his eyes were fixed on the woman standing beside Marcus. If I wasn't mistaken, she was Marcus's fiancée. In the short time I'd known Damon, his gaze had always been detached, as though the world offered nothing worth lingering over. I'd even privately nicknamed it his beautifully bored face. But now, there was nothing bored about the way he looked at her. If I had to name it, I'd call it intense. Whatever Damon felt for that woman, it wasn't casual. When he finally pulled his gaze away, I turned mine as well. A good trophy wife knows better than to speculate on the boss's private attachments. Guessing the wrong thing in this game could get you out of a job fast. I thought all I had to do was stick with Damon in our quiet little corner until the dinner ended. Turns out trouble knows how to find you. Halfway through the evening, a woman in a sleek black gown came striding over. She looked about 25, maybe 26. Pretty, yes, but with the kind of beauty that came sharp-edged. Even before she spoke, I could tell she wasn't going to be friendly. Sure enough, her gaze skimmed over Damon's face before she said, sweet as vinegar. Damon, how's the leg these days? Marcus told me you might never stand again. But don't lose hope, miracles happen, you know. Her tone wasn't refined aristocrat so much as loudmouthed villager. And Damon's reaction? Nothing. He didn't so much as glance at her. Let her yap. His expression didn't ripple. That only seemed to egg her on. She picked up 2 glasses of champagne from a passing tray and held one out to him. I missed your wedding, something came up. Let's drink to it now, a little late. He didn't take it. Her hand hung there midair for a beat too long. The pause made it awkward. After 2 seconds, she pivoted, and offered the glass to me instead. I flicked a glance at Damon. Maybe he felt my eyes on him, because his voice came, quiet but carrying, leaving no room for her to save face. Victoria Shaw. Adopted by the old man. Once confessed to me in private. Oof. I wasn't sure that was the kind of thing you announced in the middle of a party. From the way he said it, I could guess how that confession had gone, a clean, merciless rejection. No wonder she'd been sniping at him, love-curdled into spite. Victoria's glass was still hanging there, and people were starting to notice the little tableau. Seeing Damon wasn't going to intervene, I reached out to take the drink. Adopted or not, she was still a Shaw family princess. There was no way I could refuse a toast from the princess of the house. Except. The moment my fingers touched the stem, Victoria let go early. I didn't even have time to react. The glass slipped, the red wine spilling straight onto Damon. It bled across his suit jacket and seeped into the crisp white shirt beneath, blooming in dark, ugly stains. The glass rolled twice down his chest before tumbling to the floor. Crash. Shards scattered across the polished floor, one jagged piece bouncing onto my foot with a sting sharp enough to make me flinch. Victoria's expression hardened in an instant, her brows snapping together as her voice rose, shrill enough to draw heads. I was being polite, toasting you for Damon's sake. You don't want to drink, fine. But smashing the glass, what's that supposed to mean? Now she had everyone's attention, she went in for the kill. If you're still upset no one showed up to the wedding, just say so. But to throw a glass at a Shaw family dinner, are you declaring war on the Shaws? I frowned. What a lovely little hat she'd just tried to stick on my head. I wanted to fire back, but I still had to gauge Damon's reaction. When I glanced down, he looked as calm as ever, until our eyes met and one brow lifted ever so slightly. I didn't know if I was reading it right, but the message I took was, go ahead. And I'm not the type to need telling twice. Miss Shaw, no need to crown me queen of a rebellion. It's my first time in your family home, and I've been on my best behavior. That spill was an accident. But if you insist on finding a reason. I smiled, sweet as poison. Let's say I just don't like you. Then, feigning sudden realization, I let my voice rise enough to carry through the room. Or, are you worried I'm still bitter about you confessing to my husband in private? Gasps rippled through the guests. I even put a hand over my mouth like I'd let something slip. Oh no, was I not supposed to say that? Victoria's face went from flushed to ashen in seconds. You're spouting nonsense. Damon's my brother, how could I ever? Her voice cracked, then sharpened with venom. And besides, he's just a cripple. Why would I? That one landed hard. Her reaction said it all. Whatever had happened between them wasn't the kind of thing you could spin politely, not when you were both children of the Shaw family. I just lifted a shoulder and looked at Damon, pitching my voice soft and wounded. Damon, am I making things up? He didn't look at me, but the faint curve at the corner of his mouth said everything. And when he finally spoke, the two words were quiet, certain, and cut like a blade. No. It was all the confirmation anyone needed. Then he turned his head toward me, speaking to me, but his voice carried, low and clear, to every corner of the banquet hall. The video's still saved. If you want to watch it later, I'll show you. I beamed at Victoria. Perfect. I've always wondered what confessing to your own brother looks like. Miss Shaw, your overseas education really must have broadened your openness. Her composure cracked. In one sharp step, she closed the space between us, arm swinging up, her hand aiming straight for my face. Her hand came down hard, but never touched me. Two hands, one high, one low, had caught Victoria's wrist in midair. For a beat, silence wrapped the hall. Then came the collective hiss of a dozen sharp inhales. One of the hands belonged to Damon. Seated in his wheelchair, he'd lifted his arm just enough to block her. The other was what made everyone stare. Marcus. The same Marcus who, since entering the banquet, had worn nothing but icy detachment, brushing off every attempt at polite conversation. His fingers closed over Victoria's wrist, his voice cutting through the air, low and edged in steel. Watch yourself. For words, heavy enough to make her flinch. Gone was the sneering, sniping woman from moments before. In front of Marcus, Victoria stood stiff and silent, her eyes lowered, barely daring to breathe. Marcus didn't bother saying more. He didn't need to, for words from him were already a public verdict. His gaze skimmed over her, then landed on me, holding for the briefest second before he turned away. From his side, the woman in the red dress broke off and walked toward us. She wasn't Victoria's brand of haughty. Instead, she greeted Damon with a polite nod before looking to me. A slender, pale hand extended between us. Hello. I'm Marcus's fiancée, Eleonora Hayes. I took her hand quickly. Eleonora. The name didn't match the woman, there was nothing soft or understated about her. She was all allure, her makeup flawless, her smile carrying a warmth that almost made me stare. If there was ever a face made to unseat kingdoms, this was it. No wonder she stood beside Marcus. We exchanged a few polite lines before she moved on. But I noticed Damon's gaze. From the moment she arrived to the second she walked away, his eyes never left her. Not for an instant. So. Mr. Icecold had a soft spot. Once Eleonora was gone, Damon stayed silent, only sending me off for drinks. One after another. His brow furrowed, as though his thoughts weighed more than the liquor in his glass. Eventually, I couldn't watch him keep going. I leaned in, voice low, telling him alcohol was bad for his health, that he should pace himself. His eyes slid to me, sharp as a pin. Then he reached into his pocket, rummaged, and handed me a bank card. Shut up. I stared at it for a beat. Before I could ask, he said. 50,000. No pin. Yes, sir. I snapped my mouth shut. Card in hand, I turned it over once, twice. Honestly, how did this man always have a random card with a random amount ready to hand out, like he kept them stashed for exactly this kind of moment? At long last, the family dinner ended. I exhaled in relief, steering Damon's chair out of the Shaw estate. Once we were in the car, he slipped off his jacket, pinched the bridge of his nose, and leaned back with his eyes closed. Sylvia. I leaned toward him, just as the car rounded a corner. I lost my balance and fell right into his chest. Weird. My hands came up instinctively, and through the fabric of his shirt I felt abs. Firm. Defined. How the hell did a man in a wheelchair have abs like that? Sit-ups from the seated position? I was still puzzling over it when his voice rumbled above me. Had enough? Huh? I jerked upright, snatching my hand back. The car turned, I just, didn't sit right. That was all he said before opening his eyes and glancing at the driver. Next month, a raise. The driver thanked him quickly, smiling in that quiet, gloating way where your lips are grinning but you don't make a sound. Once the raise drama passed, I asked in a lower voice, "So, what was it you wanted to tell me?" Instead of answering, Damon tilted his head toward me, reached somewhere out of sight, and dropped a small, ornate bag into my hands. Inside? A few pieces of the almond cake from earlier. He'd remembered. I froze for a beat before taking them, the rich, delicate scent hitting me right away. The Shaw family's private chef really was as good as people said, sweet but not cloying, the perfect bite. Without thinking, I picked one up and held it out to him. You should try. He glanced down, then, miracle of miracles, actually leaned forward and took the bite. The second night we shared a bed, I was the one who helped Damon into it. Beforehand, one of his personal assistants had taken him to shower. When he came out of the bathroom, he was dressed in black silk pajamas. The exact same set I was wearing. Couple's pajamas. The only light in the room came from the night lamp. I hurried over to push his wheelchair toward the bed, forgetting to put on shoes, bare feet on the floor, not cold exactly, but enough to make my face warm. We were, at best, a contractual husband and wife. Matching sleepwear felt dangerously intimate. As I pushed him toward the bed, he kept frowning, urging me to move faster. It wasn't until I had him seated on the mattress that his eyes flicked down to my feet. The floor's cold. So, like an obedient wife, I climbed onto the bed. For all his detachment, the man could be oddly considerate. Later that night, I found myself wide awake. I kept thinking about falling into his arms in the car earlier, about the heat and the solid weight of him. Beside me, Damon slept like a stone, probably the after-effects of all that wine. He was so out of it he even mumbled in his sleep. "Sylvia, that card, no money." Then, just like that, he was gone again, back under. I lay there staring at the ceiling, clutching the bank card he'd pressed into my hand earlier that day. Sleep? Not a chance. When I woke, the space beside me was empty. I figured it must be mid-morning, but when I pulled back the curtains, the world outside was still wrapped in gray. The clock read barely past 5. Yawning, I shuffled to the bathroom. My plan was to crawl back into bed for another round of sleep, until a thought struck me. Damon. He wasn't exactly mobile. Where the hell was he going at this hour? I cinched my robe tighter and stepped into the hall. The night lights along the corridor cast everything in muted shadows. I padded to the top of the stairs, leaning over to check the living room below, empty. Maybe he'd gone out for something urgent. I was turning back toward the bedroom when I heard it, Damon's voice. Low. Cool. And too far away for me to make out the words. It was coming from somewhere down the inner hallway on the first floor. I shouldn't have been curious. I should have been smart enough to walk away. But curiosity won. I slipped downstairs, silent as I could, and followed the sound. The door to one of the rooms wasn't shut all the way. I held my breath and leaned to the side, peering through the gap. And froze. Gone was the detached, half-bored Damon I thought I knew. In his place was a man who radiated danger. Black silk pajamas hung loose on his frame as he sat in a chair, posture relaxed in a way that still managed to dominate the space. His eyes were colder than I'd ever seen, harder, sharper. The kind of gaze I'd thought only Marcus could pull off, and this might even be worse. "1 minute," he said, cigarette between his fingers, voice lazy but edged. "Explain yourself." Only then did I notice the rest, several men in black suits standing at attention around him, and on the floor in front of him a man kneeling with his back to me. The kneeling man's shoulders went stiff at Damon's words, but he stayed silent. Damon didn't press. He just sat there, smoke curling from his hand, eyes fixed on the man like he had all the time in the world. From my angle, I could see his face perfectly, and the deadly gleam in his eyes. In all the days I'd been around him, I'd never realized how much pressure he could exert without raising his voice. I was still caught staring when Damon's tone shifted, louder now, with a snap of warning that sent the kneeling man flinching. The sound startled me enough that my hand twitched, pushing the door open a fraction more. The hinges gave a soft creak. And just like that, the scene froze. I found myself staring straight into Damon's eyes, full of steel, shadow, and something I couldn't quite name. The air felt thick, sharp with tension. I forced a smile, glancing at Damon. "I woke up and didn't see you, so I got a little worried. Thought I'd come check." "You're fine, so I'll head back upstairs." I was already turning when his voice cut through the quiet. "Wait." Not the lazy, detached drawl I was used to, this was lower, firmer. 2 syllables wrapped in ice. I took a slow breath and turned back. His gaze was fixed, not on my face, but on my feet, his brows drawn together. I followed his eyes and, oh. Barefoot. Right. I'd kicked off my slippers at the top of the stairs so I could sneak around quietly. In the rush of nerves, I hadn't even noticed the chill of the floor. Damon motioned to one of his assistants, who immediately brought over his wheelchair and helped him into it. He rolled forward until he was right in front of me. His eyes stayed cool, unblinking. The weight of it made my chest tighten. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What was I even supposed to call him right now? Mr. Shaw felt stiff. Damon felt too familiar. While I was hesitating, he made the decision for me. His hand shot out, closing around my wrist. A small tug, and suddenly I was in his lap. My heart pounded. Not from shyness, but from panic. His legs were already injured, the last thing I needed was to make them worse. I braced against the armrest, ready to stand, but my palm must have hit some button because the chair started gliding toward the wall. Thankfully, Damon stopped it before we crashed. His brows pulled tighter as he pressed me back down. "Sit still." The chill in his voice had me freezing in place. And that's how I ended up perched on his lap while he steered us toward the elevator. The mansion had one, so stairs weren't a problem, but being this close to him for the ride upstairs definitely was. I stayed rigid all the way back to the bedroom, terrified I'd somehow hurt him just by moving. By the time we reached the bed, my face was on fire. If the situation weren't so complicated, I'd have called my mother right then to tell her she really needed to stop believing every piece of gossip she heard. Because whoever said Damon's injured legs meant he was impotent, clearly hadn't done their research. The wheelchair stopped at the bed, and I hurried to get off, perching awkwardly on the edge. "I can help you onto the bed," I murmured, face warm. Damon rubbed his temple. "No. I'll sit for a while." Then, in that calm, unreadable tone, "It's still early. Go back to sleep." "Okay." After what I'd just stumbled upon downstairs, I wasn't about to test my luck. I did as I was told. It was, in fact, still early. Before long, sleep started pulling me under again. Somewhere in that hazy in-between, I felt the mattress shift. Someone lay down beside me. My arms moved on instinct, sliding around a waist, and legs hooking over his like a koala. Back home, I always slept like this with my giant teddy bear, full contact, hands and feet both. Whoever I'd latched onto went a little stiff. When I woke again, sunlight was spilling across the bed. I blinked open my eyes, straight into a pair of deep, dark ones, shadowed and unreadable. My gaze drifted lower. Damon. Still in those black silk pajamas, 2 buttons undone at the collar, exposing a sharp line of collarbone. I forced myself to look away, and realized exactly how I was holding him. Arms locked tight around his waist. Legs wrapped over his like an octopus. Our eyes met again. My pulse stuttered. I released him at once. Sorry, habit. Wrong move. The man who'd been all cool detachment a moment ago suddenly narrowed his brows, voice chilling. Habit of holding who? Huh? I blinked, then answered honestly. A life-sized teddy bear. 2 seconds of silence. Then his lips curved slightly, almost like a smile. I'll have the assistant buy you a new one. He meant it. We'd barely made it halfway through breakfast before his assistant appeared with 2 bodyguards, each man lugging 2 enormous stuffed bears in different colors. Damon gave him a glance. Which one? Put it on the bed. I swallowed the bite of cake in my mouth. The gray one. I didn't say the rest, that the gray one reminded me a little of him, and I had a feeling it would be very comfortable to hold. Breakfast was nearly done when Damon's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, and his expression iced over. Curious, I risked a sideways glance. The name flashing on the display, Marcus. He didn't rush to answer. It wasn't until the call was about to drop that he slowly set down his fork, wiped his hands, and picked up. Too lazy to lift the phone, he hit speaker. Marcus's voice filled the air, blunt, no greeting. I need a translator. Heard Miss Sylvia majored in German. Lend her to me for the day? I nearly choked on my coffee. Borrow me for a day? Was he serious? The mighty Shaw family couldn't scrape together a single backup translator? Yeah, right. Needing a translator was the excuse, there was clearly something else going on. I swallowed, set my cup down, and glanced at Damon. Contract marriage or not, I was technically the Shaw family's second young madam. Being borrowed by his older brother didn't sit right with me. But Damon only paused for a couple of seconds before saying, fine. No questions. No asking when, where, or what to prepare for. Just that single, easy word, then he hung up. 2 minutes later, his phone buzzed again. He didn't even look right away, just kept eating his steak, rare, juices pooling on the plate. Who even had that kind of appetite at this hour? Only after his plate was spotless did he check the screen. Looked like Marcus had sent over the time and location. When breakfast ended, Damon surprised me by riding along with me to the company. I'd heard the rumors, how, even before the accident, Damon was a spoiled playboy who barely set foot in the office, living for parties and indulgence. I'd assumed he'd just send a driver. The car ride was quiet. As always. Only when we were about to pull up did he finally speak. There may be some technical terms. Can you handle them? I wanted to bluff, but this was the Shaw family's billion-dollar business. Not exactly a place to fake it. I shook my head. No. I half expected him to call in a professional translator right then and there. Instead, he just shut his eyes and leaned back, unbothered. When we arrived in the conference room, Marcus and the foreign clients came in. I stood quickly, offering a careful greeting. And from there, things went perfectly. But not because of me. My German was passable, barely. I'd scraped through college with grades that clung to the bottom rung, and I hadn't used the language since graduating. I could keep up with casual conversation, but once they started throwing around specialized industry terms, I was lost. Every time I stumbled, Damon's voice would cut in, calm, cool, pronunciation flawless. Halfway through, the client stopped addressing Marcus and me altogether, speaking directly to Damon. The negotiations rolled on smoothly. By the end, the foreign rep slapped the table and signed off. Just like that, an 8-figure deal, closed as if it were nothing. From my seat, I had the perfect view of Damon's profile. Seated in his wheelchair, posture perfectly straight, he radiated an understated authority that made his injured legs irrelevant. Cool, reserved, impossibly self-possessed. When I first met him, I thought he was simple to read, disabled, unable to have children, strangely grounded for a man with his bank account. But the more I saw, the less simple he became. Marcus's power was sharp, obvious, impossible to miss. Damon's was different. He wore recklessness like a mask, something to make people underestimate him. But the deeper you looked, the more he felt like a fog you could never quite see through. And no matter how close you got, you'd never really know what was on the other side. After the contract was signed, Marcus invited the clients to lunch. They politely declined. We left the conference room together, and right at the doorway, ran into Eleonora. She was carrying an elegant insulated container, the kind you knew at a glance held homemade soup. I trailed a few steps behind the others, quietly watching her. So, even the fiancée of a man like Marcus Shaw could roll up her sleeves, make soup from scratch, and bring it to the office herself. I was still processing that when it happened, Eleonora's heel must have caught on something. She slipped. It was Damon who caught her. From his wheelchair, he leaned so far forward he nearly tipped out of it. But his hand closed around her wrist just in time, steadying her before she fell. Meanwhile, Marcus, her fiancé, didn't so much as lift a hand. Not a move. I watched the whole thing in silence. Damon's grip on her wrist was firm, almost protective, and then, as if burned, he let go abruptly. It should have had nothing to do with me. But for some reason, my chest felt a little too tight. At the elevator, the foreign client smiled at me. "So you're Mr. Shaw's fiancé? You were excellent, thank you for translating." I blinked. Then it hit me, when he said Mr. Shaw, he meant Marcus. A misunderstanding. I opened my mouth to correct him, but Marcus beat me to it. "Thank you. The elevator's here. Here's to a successful partnership." In flawless German. I stared. Until now, Marcus hadn't spoken a word of German during the meeting. I'd assumed he didn't know any. Turns out he'd just been playing dumb. The heaviness in my chest deepened. Because standing right there was Damon, who I knew could understand every word, and he didn't bother to clear it up either. When the client was gone, Eleonora handed Marcus the insulated container. "I made soup this morning." "Thanks," Marcus said lightly, passing it straight to his assistant without even opening the lid. With the deal sealed, Marcus suggested lunch for the four of us. As expected, Damon agreed. For brothers who supposedly hated each other, they managed to keep the knives hidden, at least in public. Marcus's assistant booked us a table at an upscale new restaurant nearby. Even with his money, they couldn't get a private room, so we took a secluded corner in the main dining area. The food was slow to arrive, but worth the wait. I was too busy enjoying the chef's skill to think about anything else. Until, eating ribs, I dripped sauce onto my hands. I ducked my head to wipe it off, and caught sight of something under the table. Eleonora. Marcus's fiancée. Damon's not quite sister-in-law. The woman he watched at the banquet like she was the only thing in the room. She was sliding the toe of her stiletto along the hem of Damon's trousers. I froze for 2 seconds before forcing my eyes back up. Out of the corner of my vision, Damon was calmly peeling shrimp, his expression unreadable. If he noticed her foot, he gave no sign. Honestly, I wanted to tell her his legs were paralyzed. She could rub her shoe against him all night, and he probably wouldn't even feel it. Hell, she could stick a couple of needles in him under the table and he wouldn't flinch. But I'd seen it by accident, and showing it would only make things worse. So I swallowed it down, literally, by taking 2 long sips of soup. When I set my spoon down, there were several neatly peeled shrimp on my plate. I looked up. Damon. So that's what he'd been doing. For me. My gaze flicked briefly to Eleonora before I murmured a quiet, "Thanks." I'd barely picked one up before Damon dropped his chopsticks with a faint sigh. "Take me to the restroom." It took me a beat to realize he was talking to me. I set the shrimp down. Okay. Still not sure why he needed me to push him when his wheelchair was fully motorized. I pushed Damon to the men's room and stopped at the door. He went in alone, and I stayed in the hallway. The window nearby was open. A cool breeze slipped through, stirring the air, bringing with it that old itch for a cigarette. Too bad I hadn't brought any today. I paced the hallway twice, restless. Then a voice came from behind me. Craving a smoke? I turned, startled, and found Marcus. What was it with this man and bathrooms? Every time I saw him, it was within 10 feet of one. He slipped a pack from his pocket, one brow lifting as he offered it to me. I hesitated, then caved. But I'd barely taken my first drag when his voice came, casual and far too direct. Have you noticed Damon's fond of my fiancée? I choked instantly, the smoke hitting the back of my throat. Cough, no. When I caught my breath, I shook my head firmly. You're overthinking. Damon's married now. Why would he have designs on his future sister-in-law? That was one question I wasn't touching, truth or not. Still rattled, I lifted the cigarette for another pull, only for Marcus to pluck it right out of my fingers. He took a slow drag himself, then crushed the ember out with the pad of his thumb. Before I could protest, he stepped in, bracing one hand against the wall beside me. The other blocked my only way out. He leaned down, his breath warm across my cheek. Sylvia, he said, voice low, you and Damon have a contract marriage. His mouth curved, just enough to make the next word sting. So why don't the four of us trade? Crazy. That word slammed into my ears, and my mind went completely blank, just those two syllables, echoing over and over. Either I'd lost my mind, or Marcus had lost his. Did he even realize what the hell he was saying? I swallowed, but no words came. Because in that flash of a second, something I'd just seen under the table burned back into my mind. Eleanor's foot, sliding along the back of Damon's knee. So Damon's warmth toward her hadn't been my imagination. Were they, actually something? I have a flaw, once my brain hooks onto something, it drifts. Hard. And right then. Sylvia. The voice cut in from an angle, low and sharp. Damon's voice. It hit me like a cold blade down the spine, and I shivered before I could stop myself. My hand jerked, shoving Marcus away a fraction. At the bathroom entrance, Damon sat in his wheelchair, eyes locked on us, a frown pulling tight between his brows, anger leaking through the edges. His gaze flicked, and I noticed his hand gripping the armrest, knuckles pale, tendons standing out like ropes. He was furious. I rushed to explain, but I'd barely taken a step before someone seized my wrist. Marcus. One sharp pull, and I was back at his side. God, the nerve on this man. Or maybe it was just the shameless confidence of someone who thought no one could touch him. Ignoring my struggle, he clamped a hand on my shoulder and looked at Damon with a smile that wasn't even pretending to be friendly. You seem to enjoy Eleanor's little games, Marcus drawled. Why don't we switch? The harder I fought, the tighter his grip got, until my shoulder throbbed, and I half wondered if he'd crack a bone. I locked eyes with Damon and shook my head. Damon, I didn't get the chance to finish. Damon rolled forward, stopping right in front of us. He sat. Marcus stood. By height alone, Marcus had the upper hand, but somehow Damon's presence didn't yield an inch. He tipped his chin, meeting Marcus's stare for 2 loaded seconds before his hand shot up, fisting the front of Marcus's shirt. One pull, and the great Marcus Shaw bent at the waist, forced down. For a heartbeat, the heir to the Shaw Empire looked almost small. Marcus. Damon's spine was straight as a blade, voice low, words precise. You don't need to send your fiancé to test me. My legs are gone. Useless. You can stop now. Anne. His gaze iced over, pausing just long enough to make the silence sting. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. He let go. Smooth, almost casual. Then brushed at the wrinkles he'd just made in Marcus's shirt, one pat, then another. Not too light, not too hard. Next time, save yourself the trouble. These little games? Pointless. If I wanted that so-called heir title, you wouldn't be in that seat now. And with that, Damon turned, taking me with him. I exhaled, tension unspooling, and hurried after. We were almost at the corner when Marcus's low chuckle drifted after us. Damon, he called, voice edged with amusement. I knew you'd be far more interesting than I thought. Honestly, I couldn't tell if these brothers were wired wrong. Marcus had just been manhandled and threatened by his own younger brother, and instead of blowing up, he actually sounded pleased. The whole family was nuts. Of course I was feeling guilty. Damon had just caught me in a not-so-innocent pose with Marcus, and now I didn't dare say much, just trailed after him like a shadow. He didn't stop until we were out of the restaurant. I figured I'd push his wheelchair, a peace offering of sorts. But just as I moved in behind him, he flicked the controls and shot forward. I was left holding nothing but air. I froze for 2 seconds, then sighed inwardly. Prideful, much? Fine. I kept following him until we reached the car. The driver helped him in, and I was just about to climb in after. The door shut. Through the tinted glass, I could only make out his outline. Damon, I called instinctively. The driver climbed in. The sleek black phantom pulled away, gliding past me like I didn't exist. You've got to be kidding me. I stood there staring at the taillights, muttering in my head about how petty he was, wouldn't even give me a chance to explain. Guess I was taking a cab again. This time, though, I wasn't about to repeat last time's humiliating 2 cars, 1 destination chase. I waited at the curb. 5 minutes passed. No taxi. What I did get was Damon's Rolls-Royce. The very same car that had sped off came looping back, stopping right in front of me. The window rolled down, revealing Damon's profile, cold, unreadable. I couldn't get a read on him. Didn't know what to say. 10, maybe 15 seconds passed. Then he finally turned his head. Getting in? Yes, yes. When a man like him lowers the ladder, you climb, fast. I slid into the seat, but Damon's face stayed carved in stone. Not a word. The air inside the car was thick enough to choke on. Even the driver didn't dare breathe too loud, terrified of provoking the man in the back. I thought about mustering the courage to smooth things over, but every time I stole a glance at him out of the corner of my eye, nope. Not today. The silence held until the car rolled into his estate's garage. I exhaled, relieved, and slipped out before the driver could circle around. I helped Damon back into his wheelchair, trying to be useful. I was just about to start pushing when he powered forward on his own. Not a word. And just like that, he was gone again. Infuriating man. We'd been married 4 days, but tonight was the first time I'd been left alone in this huge house. After we got back, Damon told me to go upstairs. He disappeared somewhere, no explanation. Because I'd been worrying about his mood all evening, I couldn't relax. He was the one holding the purse strings here, and when a man like that gets angry, the fallout only lands on one person. Me. So I made up my mind and went downstairs to look for him. No sign of Damon. He liked quiet. Didn't like people in his personal space. Even the cleaning crew only came at set times. By night, the place was cavernous and echoing, too empty for comfort. I wandered through the silent rooms in my slippers before retreating back to my bedroom. Still no Damon. My mom texted just then, and I lay curled under the covers, replying half-heartedly between yawns. Sleep was just starting to pull me under when the blanket over my head was yanked away. A scream caught in my throat. Moonlight spilled across the man standing over me. Damon. His hands pinned me in place as his lips, tasting faintly of liquor, fell fast and unsteady. At my brow. My temple. My mouth. One hand clamped my jaw, forcing me still as he kissed me hard, unyielding, determined. I stared at him, stunned, too shocked to react. This wasn't a kiss, it was an assault on every defense I had left. Sylvia, he breathed against my lips, my name slurred but waited. His grip on my jaw softened into a slow stroke across my cheek. I wanted to take my time with you, he murmured, voice low, rough. But why can't you behave? I wanted to say I had behaved. That it was his brother who'd staged the whole scene, making Damon walk in on something that looked far more intimate than it was. But I never got the words out. His mouth claimed mine again, swallowing the chance to explain. No space. No escape. He braced his hands on the mattress, leaning over me. Moonlight lit his eyes until they gleamed like a predator's. Sylvia. The sharp edge in his voice dulled as the alcohol faded, and I saw something else there, something calculating, searching. Do you even know, he rasped, why, when I needed a trophy wife, I chose you? I shook my head. Truth was, I had no idea why this deal had landed in my lap. No need to sell my body. No need to sell my soul. Just marry him, play the decorative wife, and walk away with millions. A setup like that, most women would claw each other's eyes out for it. So why me? Damon stayed silent long enough to make my nerves itch. I pressed my hands against his chest, my voice dropping to a whisper. Why? His eyes moved slowly over my face, lingering on my mouth. He pressed his lips together, Adam's apple shifting. The air between us thickened instantly. I held my breath, my pulse starting to race. Finally, he spoke. I'll tell you later. I wanted to say no, tell me now, but before I could move, the loose strap of my nightdress slipped down my shoulder. His gaze followed. The moment it landed, it burned, hot and unblinking. I shoved him back and yanked the strap up. My voice caught, stuttering from nerves. It's late. You should get some sleep. Damon's lips curved. Is that an invitation? My face flushed hot. I shook my head, about to answer, but he beat me to it. Sylvia, he murmured, I've been drinking. I swallowed. So? One hand came up to undo 2 buttons on his shirt. A flicker of heat darkened his eyes. So it's hard to control myself. But that was all. He didn't move closer. About half a minute later, he rolled onto his back beside me. His legs lay slack, unmoving, the whole time, it had been his arms doing the work. A pang went through me. So the legs really were useless. I'd wondered before if the injury was just some wolf in sheep's clothing act, but apparently not. For a while, he didn't say anything. I thought he was drifting off when his voice cut through the dark, low, rough, and frayed. How about I give you a way to make money? Interested? Yes. Yes. I propped myself up on one elbow, eager. What kind of way? He turned his head toward me. Get the marriage license. I blinked. The license? I thought the wedding had just been for show, a staged arrangement, nothing binding. And now he wanted to make it legal? I hesitated. Is there a time limit? He was quiet for a few seconds. 3 years. 10 million. He didn't sound completely sure, like he was testing me. And me? I grabbed his hand on the spot. Deal. In case he changed his mind, I even set my alarm for the next morning, planning to be at the registry the moment it opened. But later, lying there, my curiosity got the better of me. Why? I asked. Damon's eyes slid shut. His voice, cool again, cut off the question like a blade. Don't pry into the boss's business. Damon and I got the marriage license. And turns out I'm an idiot. Too trusting. And way too willing to believe in the financial power of the second Shah son. Right after we registered, Damon handed me a piece of paper. I thought it was a check. It was an IOU. In crisp black ink, Damon Shah owes Sylvia, my full name, 10 million USD, to be repaid within 3 years. I stared at it, silently cursing this gorgeous, infuriating, crippled bastard. Not that I could really call him ugly. That face was so unfairly beautiful it made even my anger hesitate. After a long, brooding look, I folded the paper and tucked it away. Then, while Damon sat in the car with his eyes closed, I pulled out my phone, snapped a discreet photo, blurred out the details, and posted it online. Does an IOU like this hold up in court? The lawyer didn't reply, but Damon did. Stop searching, he said without opening his eyes. I'll give it to you within 3 years. We'll see, I muttered. That made him open his eyes, glaring like I was a hopeless case. We're married now. Doesn't that make all my money yours? My eyes lit up. Good point. I switched my phone off and, with all the dignity I could muster, asked for his bank card pins. Damon tossed me his wallet, 4 or 5 cards inside. He rubbed his brow like I was giving him a headache. They're all your birthday. I just changed them. I didn't even pretend to be polite, I pocketed every card. Shaw money had to be Shaw money. Even if there wasn't 10 million in there had to be a few million at least. If we were officially married, and Damon himself said it, I was treating this as marital property. Which is how I discovered Damon is a menace. Later, I couldn't resist. I made up an excuse, had him drop me at the mall, and the moment he drove off, I slipped into a nearby bank. 5 cards. Total balance? Less than 1 million. I seriously started wondering if Damon was the Shaw patriarch's illegitimate son. But even for a secret child, the numbers didn't add up. The Shaws weren't exactly a small family, being flat broke shouldn't be part of the deal. I was still staring at those depressing balances when Damon called. The old man's back, he said. He wants to meet you. My legs nearly gave out. Before I married Damon, I could have told you nothing about him or Marcus. But the old man? Everyone knew his name. Alistair Shaw. Originally a literary man, a celebrated author, until he walked away from the page, dove into business, and struck gold on his very first venture. From there, he built one of the most powerful empires in the city. Now well into his later years, Alistair Shaw's reputation still lingered, merciless, decisive, feared. I'd seen a TV interview once, barely 3 minutes long, and even through the screen, the cold steel in his eyes made me shiver. I rifled through everything I'd ever heard about Alistair Shaw in my head, and it wasn't comforting. With something close to a whimper, I asked, "Can I not go?" Across from me, Damon's voice was lazy. "What do you think?" "Yeah." That was a no. He sounded almost reassuring when he added, "Don't be afraid. The old man's very gentle." Gentle. Right. That word made my eyes sting for entirely different reasons. But no matter how much I wanted to skip it, there was no avoiding this. I forced myself to buy a reasonably modest dress at the mall, changed in the fitting room, and stepped out, only to spot Damon's car already waiting by the curb. Once I was in the passenger seat, I smoothed my skirt, trying to keep my voice even. "Is Mr. Shaw's place far from here?" I'd heard he preferred to live alone, rarely staying at the sprawling Shaw family estate I'd visited before. "Not far," Damon said, tone flat. Not far to me meant at least 20 minutes. It took 3. We'd barely pulled away from the mall before he turned into a nearby gated community. I knew this neighborhood, seen it online. Prime real estate, walled off from the city's noise, the kind of place where a single square foot could finance your early retirement. I wasn't ready. At all. My fingers twisted the hem of my dress while I took deep, steady breaths. When Damon got out, I followed, obediently taking the handles of his wheelchair. Not that he needed me to push. Past the gate, the yard was spare, just some flowers and greenery. Inside, the living room stretched wide and silent. I let out a small sigh. Maybe Mr. Shaw wasn't home after all. And then, footsteps, from the direction of the kitchen. A few seconds later, an older man appeared in the doorway, holding a spatula. His hair was more silver than black now, but his eyes were sharp, alive. A black apron was tied neatly around his waist. The face in front of me slowly overlapped with the one I remembered from old interviews, the infamous Alistair Shaw, whose cold, merciless gaze had sent chills through TV screens. Except, right now, the so-called executioner of the business world was smiling. "Damon," he boomed, voice rich and warm, "I made your favorite." He strode over proudly and held the spatula up to Damon's mouth, like a parent offering a taste. "Here, try it." Damon frowned and pushed the spatula away. At the same time, his hand shot out, clamping around my wrist and yanking me forward. "Your daughter-in-law. Sylvia." My heart vaulted into my throat. Mr. Shaw," I stammered. "Oh God. Someone save me." Who could have guessed that the man whispered about as ruthless enough to crush people without blinking would be, like this in private? Every polite, carefully rehearsed greeting I'd prepared evaporated before I could even speak. Mr. Shaw, one hand holding the spatula, the other gripping mine, beamed. Good girl," he said warmly, before letting go and reaching for 2 boxes on the coffee table. "Here, meeting gift." One of them was huge. I tried to refuse, failed, and finally accepted, nearly dropping it. Holy hell, it was heavy. Several pounds at least. He urged me to sit on the sofa, then turned back toward the kitchen, promising to make some of his best dishes for us to try. Still smiling, he disappeared again. I was left sitting there, trying to reconcile the image, the man whose slightest move could shake the entire business district, wearing an apron and fussing over lunch like a doting grandfather. Damon glanced at me, face unreadable. "Told you," he said, "he's very gentle. And he loves cooking for me." I couldn't even answer. My focus had already drifted back to the boxes. I opened the big one, and nearly blinded myself. Solid gold bars. Gleaming, stacked, heavy enough to break a toe. I swallowed hard. This was a hell of a welcome gift. Beside me, Damon poured tea, his tone casual. "That's just the appetizer. Open the smaller one." I obeyed, lifting the lid of a jewelry box. Inside was a jade bracelet. I'm no expert, but I've always had a passing interest in gemstones and enough knowledge to know this piece was no joke. The kind of jade that makes gold look like pocket change. Carefully, I closed the lid again. I could shamelessly squeeze money out of Damon without losing sleep, but Mr. Shaw's generosity? That made me nervous. After a moment of wrestling with myself, I decided to brave the kitchen to help. To my surprise, Mr. Shaw didn't send me away. On the contrary, we got along, unexpectedly well. In private, the old man had no airs about him. He manned the stove, I played sous chef. Somehow, we moved around each other in perfect sync. And the truth? Alistair Shaw was maddeningly good at it. The man could write, command an empire, and apparently put professional chefs to shame. By the time the last dish was plated, the whole house smelled like home, 6 dishes and a soup, all comforting, unfussy classics. He waved us to the table, insisting, more than once, that I relax. "Today I'm just a father," he said with a smile. Not Mr. Shaw. After the 3rd or 4th time, I actually started to believe it. His love for Damon was impossible to miss. The man who'd built a reputation on ruthless precision spent the entire meal fussing over his son. "Have some more fish, son. Tell me if your dad's cooking's gone downhill." "Damon, last month I was abroad and saw something fascinating, want to hear about it?" Damon barely engaged. He sat with that same cool, distant expression, eating whatever his father put in front of him, offering little more than a nod here and there. Watching the doting father act, I suddenly believed what Damon had once told Marcus. That if he wanted the heir seat, Marcus wouldn't stand a chance. At the time, it had just sounded cocky. Now, it sounded like a statement of fact. As if reading my thoughts, Alistair brought it up himself. He sighed, worry clouding his eyes. "Damon, when exactly are you planning to take over for me?" The question was laced with both affection and resignation. Damon didn't look amused. The moment the topic was out, he set down his chopsticks and wheeled himself toward the bathroom. With him gone, I hesitated, then set my own chopsticks aside and lifted my teacup, trying to look casual. I didn't get the chance to swallow. Across from me, Alistair Shaw's face changed. The warmth was gone, snuffed out in an instant. His gaze sharpened into something cold, predatory. The weight of it felt like a blade pressing closer and closer. He cradled his teacup, thumb stroking the porcelain as he spoke, each word deliberate. Damon doesn't know why you're really here. His voice was low, controlled. But I do. I stared at Mr. Shaw, frozen. My mind flipped back through every moment since I'd met Damon. My motive? Obvious. Money. And Damon had known that from the start. I braced myself for the inevitable, how much to walk away from my son. But that wasn't what came next. His gaze sharpened to a knife's edge. What exactly does your mother want? I blinked. My mother? What does she have to do with anything? For a long moment, he just looked at me, really looked, and every second under that stare prickled across my skin. Sweat slid cold down my back. Finally, he pulled his eyes away, frowning. Then the tension bled from his face, replaced by something almost resigned. She really didn't tell you anything, he murmured. I didn't understand. What was my mother supposed to have told me? Curiosity got the better of me. Carefully, I asked. I expected him to refuse. Instead, he told me, in just a few sentences, a story that sounded like it belonged in another lifetime. My mother had once been his girlfriend. Old man or not, Alistair Shaw wasn't ancient, just under 70 now, about 20 years older than her. In his youth, he'd been devastatingly handsome and, of course, rich. She'd fallen hard. It had burned bright. And ended ugly. She'd been betrayed, only to discover the man she'd loved was already married. The fallout? She walked away shattered. And worse, she never had children of her own. So she'd hit back. Hard. I'd always known I was adopted, picked up from an orphanage when I was small. But hearing the rest, the betrayal, the revenge, the grief, it left my mouth hanging open, no words fitting the moment. I was still trying to process it when Damon returned. I don't know why, but the sight of him stopping beside me steadied my pulse. Gave me something to anchor to. He tilted his head. Why aren't you eating? His tone was calm, almost flat. Before I could answer, he did it himself. Not to your taste? Then he glanced at his father. You need to work on your cooking. I looked at Alistair. The warmth was already back, as if the last few minutes had never happened. He smiled and nodded, agreeing without a hint of offense. Right then and there, he pulled out his phone and called an assistant, told them to buy him a stack of cookbooks and have them delivered in 30 minutes. Damon didn't so much as blink. He simply wheeled himself away, taking me with him. Behind us, the old man's voice followed, light and rambling, urging Damon to come see him more often. He said he was lonely. Damon didn't look back. Damon took me to a Thai restaurant. He said he remembered me mentioning it once, how I'd been craving Thai food. Across the table, I found myself just staring at him. My mind was still tangled in what Alistair Shaw had told me back at the house. I'd never imagined my mother, my careful, guarded, ordinary mother, had once been wrapped up in something so explosive, so steeped in betrayal and power. And with him of all people. I was so far gone in my thoughts that I didn't notice his hand until it appeared in my line of sight, long fingers, clean lines, striking in their own right. He set down a small bowl of sauce in front of me, perfectly mixed, exactly the way I liked it. Damon's brows lifted slightly. Something on your mind? I nodded, then shook my head. The things Alistair had told me weren't mine to spill. Not yet. Damon didn't press. He just sipped his tea and said, matter of fact, he told you. It wasn't a question. While I was still processing that, he waved over a server and switched our tea for wine. As he poured, his lips curved, just enough to suggest a smile, though his eyes stayed sharp. The old man's not entirely honest. There are things he definitely left out. He slid a glass toward me. Want to hear them? I took it, no hesitation this time. I do. Damon was the kind of man you could actually sit with. If he had a secret, he'd tell it straight. Over 3 plates of meat rolls and 5 bottles of beer, he filled in all the blanks Alistair had left out, polishing the picture of my mother's history with the great Mr. Shaw until it gleamed with every sharp edge. The beginning was the same. Alistair had been charming, dangerous, and utterly self-serving, stringing my mother along until she was dizzy with love. Then, just when she was overjoyed to find herself carrying his child, he stepped neatly out of the picture, parting with a generous breakup check. That was also when she found out he already had a wife. My mother had a stubborn streak you could break your teeth on. She refused to fix the problem. She wanted the baby. But a man like Alistair Shaw? He was never going to let her keep something that could be used against him later. So he staged an accident. The crash didn't just take the baby. The injuries were so severe that her uterus had to be removed. She'd never carry another child. What Alistair did tell me earlier was the cruelty. What he didn't say was how my mother hit back. Damon told me. She'd vanished into grief for months, drowning in tears, even trying to end her own life more than once. When she finally surfaced, it wasn't as the same broken woman. She went to him. No accusations. No blame. Just a stunning, tear-streaked vision of forgiveness, so sweet, so tender, that the man who'd always prided himself on being unshakable stumbled right back into her arms. My mother had always been the kind of woman men remembered. There was a reason even Alistair, after a lifetime of women, had lingered with her as long as he had. And then, right in the middle of that heat, she pulled out the scissors she'd brought with her. That was the end of Alistair Shaw's glory days. He was lucky his wife had already given him a son. Unlucky for him, that boy grew up spoiled to the bone. At 17, he drowned during a reckless trip to the countryside, and the man who'd never been seen shedding a tear wept until his voice broke. After that, Alistair adopted Marcus. But at the same time, he sent people across the world to find someone else, Damon. The son he hadn't meant to keep. When they found him and brought him home, Damon made it clear, he wouldn't wear the label of bastard. In public, Alistair could only call him an adopted son. Age had softened the old man in some ways. In public, he was still the feared patriarch. In private, every word out of Damon's mouth was met with a smile and agreement. Including the day Damon told him he was going to marry me. Alistair could have found out everything about me in hours, my name, my past, my connection to my mother. But Damon wanted it. And Alistair had never been able to deny his only living son. He didn't show up at the wedding because Damon told him not to. By the time Damon finished, my heart was still thudding like I'd just stepped off a roller coaster. God, what a rush. I tipped back a long gulp of icy beer, the chill racing down my throat and blooming in my chest, and all I could think was, my mother is a badass. She took down the man the business world still whispers about like he's made of steel and shadows. She did that. No wonder, when her name came up earlier at the table, decades later, Alistair Shaw's composure cracked. If it had been me? I'd be even more emotional. Dinner over, Damon paid the bill and took me home. I followed behind him, pushing the wheelchair, wanting to ask him something. But the words caught in my throat. The whole way back, we stayed silent. Home. Upstairs. Without discussing it, we both headed to the bedroom. I helped him onto the bed, then sat down on my side. The quiet stretched between us until I couldn't take it anymore. So, you knew who I was from the very start? He turned his head toward me, those black eyes unreadable, fathomless. Yes. And you married me on purpose? Yes. I bit my lip. To get back at your father? It wasn't hard to see, Damon's dislike for the man was bone deep. No matter how much Alistair doted on him now, bending over backward to please him, the history between them was still there. But Damon shook his head. No. He held my gaze. I did lie about it being a marriage of convenience. But it wasn't to spite him. Then why? I couldn't make sense of it. What other reason could there be? Even with his legs the way they were, Damon was Damon. His face alone could fill a room with women prettier than me, eager to please. He could have any number of them with a crook of his finger. So why me? He looked down at me, his expression calm, certain. And then he gave me an answer that somehow explained everything, and nothing. Because I wanted to marry you, he said quietly, but I didn't want to scare you off. So I used the agreement as an excuse. His answer stunned me so much I couldn't speak. The day of the wedding, wasn't that the first time we'd ever met? Damon studied me for a long moment, his long fingers coming up to pinch the bridge of his nose before he let out a quiet, almost exasperated sigh. So you really never recognized me? I blinked at him, lost. Recognize what? He was the second son of the Shaw family. I was just a girl from an ordinary home, and not even a biological daughter at that. If not for this transactional marriage, our worlds would never have touched. Cloud and mud. He crooked a finger at me. Come here. Because of his limited mobility, I obeyed without thinking, perching on the bed beside him. His hand came up, then settled gently on my head, ruffling my hair. Sylvia, I told you I was Alistair's illegitimate son from when he was young. He paused. Do you know where I grew up? I shook my head. One word at a time, he said. The orphanage. The Hearthstone orphanage. I froze. My eyes searched his face, tracing every line, every shadow, trying to connect it to a boy I remembered only in flashes, until the resemblance started to form, fragile but undeniable. My throat went dry. I thought I knew who he was. I pointed at him. Then at myself. I opened my mouth, but my voice caught, too tight to force sound out. His hand slid down to my hair, fingertips playing with the ends. Looks like you do remember, he said, his own voice thickening at the edges. And just like that, my tears came. Of course I remembered. Back then, he hadn't been Damon. He was Leo. And I hadn't been Sylvia. I'd been Garcia, no last name, no family, just a foundling given a name by the orphanage director. I'd grown up feral in that place, a street kid without streets. But him, he'd had a mother once. Until she left him. He'd been 6 when they brought him to Hearthstone. The boy I remembered had a beautiful face, but he was all bones and pallor, so thin it seemed the wind might take him apart. He'd been malnourished even before he got there, fragile and shy to the point of invisibility. And the other kids smelled weakness like blood in the water. They chased him, cornered him, bullied him relentlessly. I was the one who stepped in. I'd always been the ringleader among the kids. But defending him meant fighting for him, literally. I took as many bruises as I gave, until finally, after enough bloody-nosed battles, the little tyrants left him alone. After that, he was mine. My shadow. He'd wait outside the bathroom when I went in, and at night his cot was always pushed next to mine, his hand sneaking into mine under the covers before he could sleep. He'd been a child with no defenses, desperate for safety. At least, back then, he had been. Under my careful training, my little shadow Damon evolved from a fragile lamb into a wolf cub. He grew taller, filled out a bit, and that still soft face of his began to sharpen into something striking. And somewhere along the way, the timid boy who used to flinch at every raised voice became the toughest fighter in the orphanage. If anyone dared say a word against me, he'd charge at them with his small fists balled, eyes blazing like he was ready to tear them apart. Over time, people stopped bothering with either of us. We were left alone. I felt a little lonely. Damon, though, he seemed content. For him, it was enough just to be near me every day. But nothing good lasts forever. One day, I noticed something was off. Damon seemed hollow. Easily startled. He began pulling away when I tried to touch him. At first, I was furious. But then I stumbled on the truth. It was the headmistress. The middle-aged woman who, in public, was gentle and maternal, behind closed doors, was a predator. And Damon, no longer pale and frail but still impossibly pretty, had become her newest target. That night, he ran. He left without warning, without a word between us. I never saw him again. In the years after, I thought about him more often than I cared to admit. And more often than not, I assumed he was gone. In those days, in that place, what chance did a sensitive, high-strung 6-year-old have on the streets? Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if there were still boys like Leo in orphanages, pale, fragile, starved for safety. And sometimes I'd get this hollow ache in my chest, thinking there couldn't be another boy as beautiful as he'd been. Even with features still unfinished, he'd been unforgettable. Unforgettable enough that years later, grown and long gone from that place, I could still see those deer-like eyes in my mind. Maybe that's why, as an adult, I became obsessed with money. And why every dollar I earned went into donations for orphanages. Not the one we'd been in, never that one. The headmistress there had eventually killed a boy, whether by accident or not, and the investigation that followed dragged all her crimes into the light. She went to prison. But that was long after I'd left. Pulling myself out of the memories, I leaned back against the headboard, quietly listening as Damon told me what happened after he left. He said that after running from the orphanage, he lived on the streets. But he never wandered too far. He was afraid that if he went too far, he might never see me again. So sometimes, he'd sneak back. He'd stand outside the gates at night, watching. But he never let me see him. He was afraid that if anyone found out, I'd get dragged into trouble. And maybe even more afraid that if we met again, he wouldn't be able to make himself leave. Then one day, I was adopted. By the woman who is now my mother. After that, Damon followed from a distance, watching for a while to see what would happen. He saw that she treated me well, poured everything she had into me. Only then did he leave. I was 7 the year she took me home. From that point on, I grew up surrounded by love. My mother has always been a woman who burns bright. She loves fiercely, hates fiercely. She loves money, loves beautiful things, and yes, she can be vain, but she's also the kind of person who, with only $3 to her name, would spend one on bread for me, one on a bottle of water, and give the last to a beggar on the street. She is stunningly beautiful, and her favorite thing to wear has always been a shade of red that most people wouldn't dare to touch. Her life has been like a red rose in full bloom, blinding in its beauty. And now, knowing what I know, that maybe she had other reasons for marrying me off to Damon, I still can't hate her. Honestly, I never could. Without her, there wouldn't be a Sylvia. The night was quiet around us, Damon's voice low and rich. He kept telling his story, but the rest he skimmed over in just a few sentences. He didn't want to linger on the parts that were ugly or painful, and I didn't want to push him there. He said that later, while drifting from place to place, his mother found him. And for the first time in years, he cried. He'd thought, finally, she'd come to take him home. She bought him new clothes. She took him out for a good meal. Then she took him to the Shaws, to Alistair himself, and demanded a place for him in the family. But she knew the truth, there was never going to be a place. What she wanted was money. She'd overestimated his worth to Alistair. And underestimated just how ruthless the man could be. Alistair Shaw was never the sort of man to be maneuvered. Just as he'd once ordered the accident that stole my mother's child, he sent Damon and his mother away, and then paid a fortune to arrange an accident for her, too. Damon saved her. But the cost was his legs. The injuries left him permanently disabled. And in the end, he still couldn't save her life. He didn't even have time to feel what it was like to have his mother back before she was gone for good. He hated her for the choices she'd made. And he hated Alistair more. Still, Alistair, blood was blood, had him admitted to a private hospital, gave him the best care money could buy, and wired enough into his account to keep him comfortable for life. But even money couldn't fix his legs. When Damon left the hospital, he took that seed money and carved out an empire in the shadows of the business world, wheelchair and all. As he spoke, his brow creased, and there was a flash in his eyes, feral, sharp, that took me straight back to the little wolf cub he'd been as a boy. A moment later, it was gone. He went on. A few years back, Alistair's cherished son with his late wife drowned in an accident. Alistair mourned as if the world had ended, only to remember he still had an illegitimate child out there somewhere. He found Damon. But Damon refused to acknowledge him publicly. He wouldn't allow Alistair to reveal their blood tie. Alistair agreed to every demand. He knew Damon hated him. Still, he tried, cautiously, constantly, to win back some measure of favor. But the truth was, after years of neglect, after that one decisive moment when Alistair had known Damon was with his mother and ordered the accident anyway, it was clear he'd never cared whether Damon lived or died. He hadn't meant to kill him. But if Damon had been collateral damage, Alistair wouldn't have shed a tear. And then came the day Alistair started looking for a wife for him. That was when my mother stepped in, smiling, saying she had the perfect match. Me. Damon agreed on the spot. My mother asked for 10 million as a bride price, and he didn't even blink. And then, 10 minutes before the ceremony, that so-called getting to know each other was our first real meeting in years. Now, hearing all of it, I could finally see the truth in moments I hadn't understood before. The gentleness I'd thought was politeness. Like the night of the Shaw family banquet, when I'd casually mentioned liking a certain pastry, and he'd quietly made sure it was packed for me to take home. The time I'd crept downstairs barefoot to eavesdrop, and instead of scolding me, he'd pulled me onto his lap, worried my feet would get cold. The murder in his eyes when Marcus accidentally brushed too close to me. None of it had been for show. That night, Damon brought out the wine again. We drank a lot. Talked even more. And somewhere between the quiet of the night, the heat of the alcohol, and the raw honesty between us, it became almost inevitable that something would happen. Like his mouth finding mine. Like me, trembling, eyes closing as I leaned into him. The rumors weren't true. Damon wasn't incapable. But the other rumor, that his injury was faked, wasn't true either. His legs really were damaged. Still. With his breath warm against my ear, he murmured, "Don't worry. My legs can be fixed." He said that if he hadn't been certain of it, he never would have married me. I wanted to shake my head, to tell him it didn't matter, that I'd take him as he was. But his mouth silenced me before I could speak. The moon outside was impossibly gentle that night. So was Damon. The past lay open between us now, and whatever agreement we'd once pretended this was, it was gone. The wedding had happened. The papers were signed. And now, even the last step had been crossed. We were married, truly married, in every sense. After that night, Damon seemed different. In public, he was still the same cool, aloof man everyone knew. But when it was just the two of us, he became something else entirely. The boy who used to follow me everywhere. A few days later, it happened to be Alistair Shaw's birthday. This wasn't the kind of family dinner we'd had before, this was an event. 2 days beforehand, the old man had called Damon, voice careful, almost tentative, asking if he'd like to attend. Damon listened with that usual air of indifference, then glanced over at me. When I nodded, he finally agreed. On the night itself, Damon's hand was warm and firm around mine as we entered together. The banquet was held in one of the Shaw family's luxury hotels, the ballroom large enough to hold 1,000 people. We'd barely crossed the threshold when Alistair spotted us and started toward his son. But halfway there, Damon's cool, level stare froze him in place. The old man stopped, forced a polite smile, and didn't take another step forward. Around us, people exchanged curious looks but kept their thoughts to themselves. After all, in their eyes, Damon was nothing more than the crippled, unwanted adopted son. Victoria made her entrance next. She came over with a bright smile for Damon, but her eyes were heavy with something between longing and resentment. What a complicated woman. She was hopelessly in love with him, but rather than admit it, she hid behind haughty disdain and biting remarks, like mocking him was the only way to avoid looking pathetic. Damon ignored her completely, until she turned her aim on me. Victoria's tone was sweet as she complimented my gown, twisting the words into something barbed, suggesting I was out of my depth, that I didn't belong here. I wasn't particularly bothered. But the air around us cooled so fast I could almost see my breath. I turned to look. Sure enough, Damon's expression had iced over. In front of all those guests, he didn't just defend me, he cut her down. "Don't mind her," he said to me, his tone mild, but his eyes flicking to Victoria with scalpel precision. "Everyone has their own definition of belonging. Hers might just be a thick waist and a short neck." The color drained from her face. Her hand went to her neck, and for a second she looked ready to cry. But she swallowed it down, staying quiet. Marcus, however, stepped in. Always the gallant one, when it served him. He chided Damon under the guise of keeping the peace, going on about how it was their father's birthday and how unseemly it was for siblings to cause a scene. Halfway through his lecture, Damon pinched the bridge of his nose, his expression one of pure boredom. "You done?" he asked flatly. Then he took my hand again and led me straight toward the center of the room. There, surrounded by a small constellation of admirers, stood Alistair Shaw. But his gaze was fixed solely on his son. It was sobering to see. In his youth, Alistair had been ruthless, merciless to outsiders and to those closest to him. But time wears down even the sharpest edges. Power and wealth lose their shine when you've already tasted them all. Now, what he wanted was the simplest thing in the world: family. A son's companionship. The warmth of home in his last years. But his wife was long gone. The heir he'd been grooming was dead. And the only blood he had left hated him, refused to bear his name. And was crippled because of him. For a man like Alistair Shaw, that was a punishment far worse than bankruptcy. Still, who could say he didn't deserve it? As always, Damon steered us toward a quiet corner, away from the crush of the crowd. I glanced across the room at Eleonora and, without thinking, tugged at his sleeve. "Did you ever like her?" I asked softly. He stilled, then turned to me, his expression suddenly sharp. "Who told you that?" "No one," I admitted. "I guessed." So I told him what I'd seen at that family dinner, the way he'd been watching her. Damon's mouth curved. "No." He took a slow sip of wine. "She's like a sister to me. No blood relation, but when I was out there on my own, she helped me. A lot. Later, it was through me that she met Marcus." He exhaled. "Seeing her with him that night, it hit me. I've always felt guilty. Marcus never really cared for her, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm the one who handed her over to him." I hesitated. "But," I began, thinking of the intensity I'd seen in his eyes that night. It made him laugh. His palm brushed the ends of my hair, fingers curling in a fond, almost teasing way. "Intense? You really do overthink." "I was just watching someone I owe a debt to, someone who's like an older sister to me, realizing she's trapped in something she doesn't deserve. That's all." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I could understand that. Damon's childhood had made him an odd mix of reserved and fiercely loyal. He never forgot kindness. Or harm. Still, I couldn't help asking, why not just tell Marcus the truth and warn him to treat her better? "He wouldn't dare ignore you." Damon shook his head. "Feelings aren't something you can strong-arm into being. They have to go both ways. I don't like who she chose, but it's still her choice. I won't interfere." I nodded, thinking that maybe Damon was more clear-eyed than most. I was still processing when he tugged at my sleeve. I glanced down, just in time for him to catch my wrist. One quick pull, and I had to bend toward him. He tilted his face up, his gaze locking on mine. It burned. In less than 3 seconds, his throat moved in a subtle swallow, and then his mouth brushed mine. Warm. Brief. He released me, and I straightened, stunned, not entirely sure why he'd just kissed me. "Remember this," he said, voice calm but eyes glinting. That, he added, was a look worth calling intense. "Any look I've given anyone else?" His lips curved. "Wasn't." Heat crept up my neck. I hadn't expected him to care about that particular misunderstanding, much less make his point like that. We were still wrapped in our own quiet corner when, across the room, Alistair Shaw used his birthday to drop a bomb. "In name, my adopted son," he said, voice carrying through the ballroom, but in truth, my own flesh and blood. For a beat, the room went silent. Then it erupted. Everyone in the city knew the story. Alistair had no son. His only heir had died in an accident years ago. The Shaw family had only 3 adopted children, and Damon, crippled, cold, and least favored, was the last anyone would have bet on. Marcus had been the obvious choice for heir. For years, people had cultivated him, courted him, treated Damon like a shadow. At joint appearances, they'd gone out of their way to ignore Damon just to earn Marcus's favor. And now? They'd all backed the wrong horse. It should have been the peak of the night. But just as the room was buzzing, my mother made her entrance. She was dressed for war. A red dress, red enough to cut the air. Dark waves of hair, lips painted the same shade. On anyone else, it would have been garish. On her, it was devastating. 50 years old, yes, with the years etched into her face, but carrying herself with the kind of allure youth can't touch. She walked straight toward me, her gaze flicking to where Damon's hand held mine. Her smile deepened. She didn't speak to me. She walked right past, stopping in front of Alistair. They locked eyes. I'd expected fury. But Alistair didn't explode. He just looked at her and said, quietly, "You came." As if he'd been expecting her all along. The rest of the night fell apart after that. What was meant to be a glittering birthday celebration for the city's business elite ended in a hush, with Alistair and my mother disappearing upstairs together. No one knew what was said behind closed doors. Not Damon. Not me. We only learned the ending the next day, when the police called. My mother had been arrested. She'd turned herself in. She confessed to a murder. The murder of Alistair Shaw's son. The boy who hadn't lived to see his 18th birthday. Back then, the boy was 17, living a life where the world bent to him. Spoiled. Arrogant. Alistair, unable to have more children, indulged his only son beyond reason. Every whim granted, every want met. Clothes, food, toys, luxury was the baseline. That summer, the golden boy snuck off to the countryside without telling anyone. He'd never seen fields before, never touched real dirt, and the novelty thrilled him. Then, one night, he met a girl. When charm didn't get him what he wanted, he tried force. When she fought him, he picked up a rock and struck her. But before he could finish what he'd started, the girl's mother arrived, shoving him in a struggle, sending him into the river. That girl was me. I woke up the next day in my bed in the city, my head pounding. My mother told me, calm as anything, that she'd arrived in time and chased him off. And for me, that was the end of it. I didn't know she had killed him. I didn't know he was the son of the most feared man in the business world. It was all fate, I suppose. He had deceived her, destroyed her faith in love, stolen her child and her ability to ever have another. She had taken away his manhood, and, by pure twist of fate, ended the life of his son. Fate, or a curse. Nothing else fits. When I heard, I ran to the police station, desperate to see her. But they told me she refused to meet me. I tried again. And again. Nothing. I went home. Asked Damon to hire the best lawyer money could buy. We never got that far. Before trial, before sentencing, she was gone. It wasn't suicide. The detention center was too tightly controlled for that. She'd died when her cancer took her. Late-stage lung cancer, far past the point of treatment. I'd barely learned the truth about her, hadn't even begun to ask my questions, when it all collapsed. If it hadn't been for Damon, I don't know how I would have survived it. He stepped in fully, as her son-in-law, handling every last detail himself. At the funeral, I stood staring at her black and white portrait. It had no color. But looking at her face, I couldn't help thinking of a red dress. She had always been color itself, vivid, alive, impossible to ignore. And now she was nothing but gray. After the funeral, I went home. I thought I'd go into her bedroom, maybe sit there for a while, maybe just be near her things. But what I found instead was a letter. She'd left it for me. And in it, I realized, none of this had been chance. It had all been part of her plan. Before she died, she wanted to see me married to the right man. The man who had known me as a child, who had been separated from me for years, and yet never stopped thinking about me. The man whose legs might fail him but whose mind and will never would. The man who could keep me safe. Before she died, she wanted to see Alistair one last time. One final look at the man she had loved for a lifetime, and hated just as long. She wrote that she had always wanted to live brilliantly, bright, unrestrained. But she met Alistair. She had been just past 20, in the bloom of her youth. He was already past 40, a man with weight and presence, the kind who could close a cage without you realizing you'd been trapped. They tangled together for years, love and hate so tightly knotted neither could be pulled free. In the letter, she told me about that night in the countryside. She'd arrived to find my clothes half torn, his hands on me. If she had been even a minute later, I might not have walked away with my dignity intact. She'd charged forward in a fury, shoving him away. He stumbled, fell into the river. He couldn't swim. He thrashed in the water, and she had started toward the bank to go in after him. But then the moonlight caught his face. And she saw it. The boy trying to violate her daughter was Alistair's son. Fate. Or hell's own joke. She stood there for a long time. Torn. Hesitating. But in the end, she stayed on the shore. She let the lust-drunk boy sink beneath the water. In the second half of the letter, she explained why she had arranged my marriage to Damon. She had done her homework. She knew Damon and I had grown up in the same orphanage. She knew how close we had once been. She knew about his years of quiet watching, of guarding from afar. That was why she could give me to him without fear. As for using me to get back at Alistair? She wrote that she had never, not for a single second, considered it. My mother's handwriting was just like her, carefree, unrestrained. She'd filled several sheets, her pen running in long, loose strokes, and I could almost hear her voice between the lines. In the letter, she wrote about her lifetime of entanglement with Alistair. Love, hate, so tangled she couldn't even tell who owed who more. That was why, she said, she'd never needed to use me for revenge. She only wanted me to be happy. Even if the one who could make me happy happened to be Alistair's son. She didn't care about that. Grudges, she said, dissolve to nothing if you turn your head and look back, they belonged to her generation, not to me and Damon. On the last sheet, more than half the page was left blank. There was only one sentence. But it was that one sentence that broke me completely, that snapped the last thread I'd been holding on to. Her handwriting was usually rushed and messy. This time every stroke was deliberate. It said, I couldn't have children in this lifetime. Thank you for being my daughter. I clutched the paper, and the tears came hard and fast. If anyone should be saying thank you, it was me. I'd been abandoned the moment I was born. Thank you, for knowing there was no blood between us, and still choosing to raise me. Before I was born, I must have been in heaven, picking my mother. I chose wrong. And I was thrown away for it. But 7 years later, she found me and brought me home, making up for the mistake I made the first time. With the letter, she'd also left a bank card. The password was my birthday. Inside was everything she'd saved over the years. And the money Damon had given her. Untouched. Every cent of it, she'd been keeping for me. By some strange twist of fate, the 7th day after my mother's passing, Alistair died. He went in his sleep. The housekeeper found him in the morning, but he was already gone. When the call came, Damon didn't say much. He hung up in silence. Went to see the old man one last time, in silence. And when the funeral came, he oversaw it the same way, quiet, contained, unreadable. Alistair had been prepared. Years ago, he'd left a will with his lawyer. Every cent of his fortune would go to Damon. Marcus and Victoria got nothing, not even a token share, just the hollow title of adopted children of Alistair Shaw. It was exactly the sort of move you'd expect from Alistair. A businessman to the core, profit above sentiment. Not just profit above sentiment, but profit above everything. Pure, calculated self-interest. Even in death, he would never leave a single coin to someone who wasn't his. No surprise Marcus and Victoria didn't bother to show up at the funeral. When the guests were gone, Damon's wheelchair stayed parked before the headstone. He stared down at the black and white portrait, motionless. I stood beside him, useless in my silence. A breeze swept past. After a long time, Damon finally spoke. He let out a low, almost amused laugh, his tone edged with scorn. You know why he spent the last few years bending over backward to please me? I hesitated. To make it up to you? Damon shook his head. To make it up to himself. He never loved me. Not as his son. Even when he acted careful, attentive, trying every way to make amends, it was all for him. All to soothe his regrets. His voice was calm, but I saw the red in his eyes. He had power, wealth, everything. His only real wound was losing the ability to have more children, and then losing the one he cherished most. He should have died alone. But then he found me, his bastard son, and suddenly, I could patch the hole in his story. I could make his ending look a little less pathetic. Damon's lips curved in a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He's always only loved himself. Then, softer, almost to himself. And yet, for all the effort, for all the pretending, he was still pathetic. His gaze stayed fixed on the headstone. All his life, not one person truly stayed by him. His wife was loyal, but he bled her dry with his coldness and affairs until she died of heartbreak. Your mother loved him, and he ruined her. If he'd gone bankrupt while he was alive, not one person would have stuck around to look at him twice. He'd have died shunned by everyone. A pause. A faint, joyless laugh. How pitiful is that? But that day, Damon still let a single tear fall in front of Alistair's grave. He said. That tear was his send-off. And with it, he cut away all the ugliness of the past. All the grudges, the hate, the bitterness, buried with the dead, scattered with the wind. What remained for us was a clean slate, a future untouched. Our next step was Damon's treatment. It went well. Until something unexpected happened. 2 pink lines appeared in our bathroom. Mine. I was pregnant. The baby's sudden arrival threw our plans off track, but somehow, it gave us something brighter to look forward to. It felt like the worst was finally behind us, and everything was starting over. Just like the new life growing inside me. After that, Damon's favorite pastime became poring over dictionaries, Bibles, and Greek mythology to pick baby names. Thanks to him, I was dreaming about names every night. Eventually, I'd had enough. I grabbed his wrist. Stop thinking. I've already decided. He looked dead serious. What is it? I sipped my warm water and said casually, if it's a boy, Oliver. If it's a girl, Olivia. How about that? Damon was quiet for a moment, then suddenly pulled me into his arms. His breath brushed my ear, warm and ticklish. Or, we could have 2. I laughed into his chest, my arms wrapped around his waist. Why not go for 3? He chuckled low in my ear. All right. Then his arms tightened slightly around me, and his voice turned steady. If we have a daughter, let's call her Garcia. The moonlight spilled through the window, pale and perfect. His voice was softer than the moonlight. One like the little girl in the orphanage, the one named Garcia, who loved white dresses, and had bright eyes that turned into crescents when she smiled. I smiled. Okay. And if it's a boy? Then he'll be like the boy from that orphanage, Damon said, his gaze distant. Handsome, with the sharpness of a little wolf when he fights. I tilted my head up from his embrace, just in time to catch the moon outside our window. It had been years since Damon and I were children, but above us hung the same moon as back then. The end.